In the olden days of League of Legends, top laners would always take Ignite, and top lane would just be a bloodbath. Every single game there would be solo kills, you could pull off 1v2s against the enemy jungler, and it was always in a carry meta. Nowadays though, it's more common to see top laners take teleport, junglers don't really gank top much anymore, and you see more and more tanks. But what if I were to tell you that right now there is a pick that brings back that carry potential and that bloodbath in the top lane that we all know and love? That's right, we're talking about the creature himself, Kled. Before we get too far into the video, I want to remind you to check out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses. So if you're looking to improve your top lane gameplay, we've got a course for that. Check it out using the link in the description below and start improving your play today. Now, Kled is a very aggressive top laner, which is one of the reasons why he is so fun. Your passive prevents you from being 100 to 0'd, and it also rewards you for taking long, extended trades. Kled is really strong into most bruisers, and he beats a lot of tanks as well, meaning there's only a few champions that are meta in the top lane that you really need to worry about. One of the biggest benefits to playing Kled as a lane bully is you do not need an additional combat summoner in order to bully people out of lane and get kills. Kled already has plenty of damage in his kit, so while you can take Ignite for maybe a level 2 or 3 kill, usually you don't really need it. Typically, teleport is a safer spell to take, simply because you're probably going to be drawing a lot of jungle attention if you are heavily bullying the enemy top laner. In fact, once you get good enough, you can 1v2 the enemy top and jungle without taking Ignite. This is how powerful Kled's remount mechanic is. Now let me just briefly explain Kled's remount mechanic, since those of you who don't play Kled probably don't know how it works. Every auto attack against enemy champions will give you 15 courage out of 100, meaning if you use your full W on somebody, it's going to give you 60 out of 100 courage. This means it's only going to take one more auto and then a Q in order to give you that remount. You also get courage anytime somebody that you hit in the last 3 seconds dies, and you'll be getting 20 courage for that. For this reason, it's very easy to pull off 1v2s with Kled once you understand the 3 main ways that you generate courage. Now, I already mentioned the first 2, and the last one is using your Q, hitting your dismounted Q on enemy champions. For every pellet that you hit on an enemy champion while dismounted, you're going to be getting 5 courage. This is up to a maximum of 25 courage from one single Q. Now, just understanding how to get this courage isn't enough. You need to understand how to get it quickly. You see, the only time that you're vulnerable to dying is while you're dismounted. It is not possible to burst a Kled while he is on Skarl. Any overkill damage done to Kled while he is mounted will be completely cut when he dismounts. This means that you can save your W for when you dismount to give you a quicker remount, which will allow you to get access to your abilities again and deal even more damage. Mastering your passive is such an important thing to do when playing Kled. On top of this, every time that you remount or dismount, all of your ability cooldowns are going to be refreshed. You can dismount twice in a fight and remount once before your passive goes on a bit of a cooldown. This means that you could potentially use 2 mounted Qs and 4 dismounted Qs all in the span of less than 5 seconds if you time it all properly. This is the reason why Kled's 1v2 potential and team fighting is so insane. Kled is a really unique champion that pretty much only plays around his mount and dismount mechanic. Most other champions in the top lane play around wave management or cooldown management, or maybe a resource like mana or fury management. None of this really applies to Kled. He just wants to go in, get dismounted, remount quickly, and kill as many people as possible. While this is a very straightforward playstyle, going about it is a little bit more difficult. Now, this makes it a few times that I've mentioned quickly remounting on Kled, and honestly, it does make a huge difference between bad and good Kled players. Now, I've already explained why it's so important, but allow me to tell you how you can always consistently remount quickly in a team fight. The key here is you need to play around your W. Now, if you think that you're going to dismount, then you should only be using your W if you can guarantee a kill shortly after dismounting or once you've already dismounted. It is so important that you do not burn your W really early on into a fight before you can dismount or guarantee any kills. This is because, let's say, for example, you use your W on a tank target that just isn't going to be dying anytime soon in a team fight. This means that your W is going to be on cooldown when you dismount, and that tank isn't going to be dying very quickly. This means that you have absolutely no good way of quickly generating courage. It's going to take you a long time to remount, and in this time, you might be getting CC'd or killed. It's much better to just not use your W on that tank until you're going to guarantee that tank's death. It is much better to just sit on your W and wait for a good reason to use it, either one-shotting a carry or helping yourself remount quickly. Your W is the only ability that doesn't reset when you mount or dismount, meaning you need to use it very wisely. Now, understanding Kled's passive is the biggest thing that you need to know, but there are still other things that you should be focusing on. One small tip that will help you out a lot in the early game is don't put a point in W until you are looking to trade with somebody. You see, you can't control the cooldown on your W, it just activates as soon as it's off of cooldown on your next auto attack. This means that whenever you go to CS a minion, it's going to proc on that minion. However, you can control when the very first time you use the W is in the game. You can hold the point on your W until you need to be using your W on something, whether it's a champion, a tower, minions, anything really. You just don't level the W until you want to use it for the first time, and that'll allow you to have a little bit of extra priority in the early lane phase. Now, I mentioned earlier that Kled doesn't really care a whole lot about wave management. This is simply because he's good in the long lane, but he's also good if you're pushed up on the enemy tower because you can just dive with his passive. Kled's passive will drop tower aggro, so as long as you're not using something like Ignite, you're going to be able to re-aggro the tower and wait for the perfect opportunity to continue your dive. In a longer lane, when the enemy minions are on your tower, it's also very easy to trade with the enemy laner because all you have to do is land your E. You can use your Q in the middle of your E, so if your E lands, your Q is definitely going to be landing. You're going to get a second E, you're going to be able to get all of the autos in your W off, and you're just going to trade insanely hard. Kled doesn't really have very many short, pokey trades. Pretty much everything about Kled is just all in, over and over and over again. Now, in the super early lane phase, you can just throw Qs out and use those to poke. But generally, the later you go in the game, if you land your Q, you should be all-inning. One trick to guarantee that your Q lands is just to ult at somebody. When you land your ultimate on somebody, it applies a short knockback, which will allow you to land both your E and your Q right after. This means if you're laning against somebody who's getting pretty low, and you think they're going to try and outplay you by flashing your Q or something, you can just ult at them, and the small CC duration that your ult applies will allow you to guarantee that that Q lands. Now let's talk about mid-game and lane assignments for a second here. Unlike a lot of other champions, you really do not want to be grouping with your team in the mid game. The more targets that you are playing against in a team fight, the more likely they're going to burst you down while you are dismounted before you can remount. You should only be grouping with your team in the mid game if you have a large lead yourself or you have a numbers advantage. If neither of these things are true, just sit in the side lane and wait for people to come to you. 1v1ing in a side lane is easy for you to do. You're going to be able to pull off most 1v2s, but if they send 3 people for you, it might be better to just back off for a little bit. Your main goal in the mid game is just to get your items. You're not especially strong in the mid game, and there are other bruisers that are going to be better than you in the mid game. Late game is the hardest part of playing Kled. This is where using your ultimate properly really comes into play. You see, in the early and mid games, you can kind of get away with not really knowing what to do with your ultimate and just using it randomly whenever you want. But in the late game, one poor Kled ultimate could cost you the game. On the other hand, a really good Kled ultimate can be used to easily close out the game. Now there are two main ways that you want to be using your ultimate as Kled in the late game. The first way is you want to be using your ultimate to pick out enemy champions. If you see 4 of the enemy champions in one lane and 1 of the enemy champions in a different lane, then you can ult at that isolated target and try and pick them with your team, leveraging that into a tower or Baron or even the entire game. Picking is also very easy to do in the jungle. It doesn't necessarily need to be down a lane. Remember, when it comes to the topic of performing picks, vision is king. You can't perform a pick if you don't have vision of the enemy team, and on the other hand, your pick probably won't be successful if the enemy team has vision of you. Buying pink wards to deny vision is going to be very important in the late game. Getting deep wards down lanes is also going to be very important. As Kled especially, anytime that you shove out a lane, you should be dropping a deep ward in that lane. Now the other way to be using Kled's ultimate in the late game is to rotate. Now this could be either to rotate just on your own, say you're split pushing and your team needs you to be at Baron as soon as you can. You can just ult to Baron and get yourself there quickly, or it could be to get your entire team to rotate. Remember, your ultimate gives movement speed to your whole team. So if the enemy nexus is open, for example, you can bait a play somewhere and then ult into the nexus and kill the nexus, for example. Now the last way to use your ultimate in the late game is, of course, just using it to hard engage on the enemy team and force a 5v5. If all else fails, you can use your ultimate for this. It does give a good shield and it does a good amount of damage, so it's not as though it's a useless ability for hard engaging. The main idea here is the later the game goes, the more important that rotations and picks are, so you want to be looking for those more often than just hard engaging and forcing 5v5s. If you can force a 5v5 and win, by all means go for it. No need to go for a pick, no need to go for rotations. You can just force the game down their throats and there's nothing they're going to be able to do about it. Just keep in mind there are other ways to be using your ultimate, especially as the game goes later. Now that is just about all that I have for you for today's video on Kled. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our website, GameLeap.com. There we have hundreds of guides, all done by challenger players, sorted into a quick and easy to use courses system. We have courses both on the 5 fundamental roles as well as champion specific courses, so if that is something that interests you, make sure to check it out using the link in the description below. I've checked out a lot of our stuff on there personally, and I can honestly say it's all really high quality. Our website is one of the best learning tools out there, so if you haven't already, make sure to check it out. As always, I'm Panther. I hope you learned something valuable, and I will see you in the next one.